There's a kitchen scrap you throw in the trash every single morning that grew the most legendary rose garden in human history. Not bought, not patented, not brewed in a factory. The peel of a single banana, dried and crushed and sprinkled around the base of a struggling rose bush, can produce blooms so thick and so fragrant that nursery owners would charge you $100 for the same plant they sold you wilting last spring. A retired school teacher in North Carolina inherited 4 old rose bushes from her late mother in 2019. 3 of them were producing maybe a dozen blooms a season, and the 4th was so thin the local nursery had recommended she dig it up and replace it. Instead, she started saving banana peels in a paper bag on her kitchen counter. Every Sunday for one summer, she dried the peels in her oven, ground them into a coarse black powder, and sprinkled 3 tablespoons around each bush. By the second summer, those 4 old roses pushed out more blooms in June than she had seen in the previous 5 years combined. Her total cost was $0 because the peels were already in her trash. Her neighbor had paid $340 that same year for specialty rose food and still had aphids on every leaf. The global cut flower and ornamental rose industry is worth over $40 billion annually, and roses alone account for the largest share. American homeowners spend between $200 and $600 per rosebush at landscape nurseries, plus another $80 to $150 per plant per year on specialty rose foods, bloom boosters, organic fertilizers, and aphid sprays. Bayer, Scott's Miracle-Gro, Espoma, and a dozen other brands fight for shelf space with bottles labeled Rose Food, Bloom Enhancer, Potassium Booster, and Disease Guard. The price tag on those bottles is built around one simple lie. The lie is that roses need expensive, branded, scientifically formulated nutrition to bloom like the roses you see in old photographs of grand European estates. They do not. Those roses, the ones in the photographs, the ones in the paintings, the ones that define the very idea of a beautiful flower, were grown long before any chemical company existed. They were grown by gardeners who fed their bushes with kitchen scraps, wood ash, and the patient labor of compost piles built behind the stable walls, a free kitchen scrap that produces blooms. The cut flower industry would have to charge $50 to replicate is not a product the garden industry can sell. So they buried it under glossy bottles and trademarked formulas and let generations of homeowners forget what their grandmothers always tucked into their compost piles. They did not bury this trick because it failed. They buried it because a banana peel cannot be patented, cannot be branded, and cannot be sold in a bottle for $30. This is the story of the kitchen scrap that fed the most famous rose garden of the 19th century, the empress who built it, and the modern industry that hopes you never crack open an old gardening book to find out. Welcome to Forbidden Gardening. If these stories matter to you, the subscribe button and the bell are how this knowledge survives another generation. Here we dig up what the garden industry quietly buried. Let me take you back to where this story really begins. In April of 1799, while her husband Napoleon Bonaparte was off conquering Egypt, a Caribbean-born woman named Josephine de Beauharnais bought a rundown country estate called Malmaison, just west of Paris. She paid for it without telling Napoleon. He came home furious. She did not care. Josephine had a vision that would change the history of horticulture forever. She wanted to build the most beautiful garden in Europe, and at the heart of that garden, she would plant the most extensive rose collection the world had ever seen. Between 1804 and her death in 1814, Empress Josephine cultivated more than 250 distinct varieties of roses at Malmaison. The French Navy, at Napoleon's command, was ordered to confiscate any rose plants or seeds found on captured ships at sea. British nurseries, despite being at war with France, were granted safe passage through naval blockades to deliver rose specimens to her gardens. The Belgian artist Pierre-Joseph Redoute, often called the Raphael of flowers, spent years at Malmaison painting Josephine's roses. His 3-volume masterpiece, Les Roses, contains 170 hand-colored botanical plates that still sell at auction for tens of thousands of dollars today. By 1830, 16 years after Josephine's death, more than 2,500 rose varieties were available to Parisian gardeners, everyone traceable in some way back to her obsession at Malmaison. She did not have synthetic fertilizer. She did not have rose food in a bottle. Her gardeners had compost piles, manure, wood ash, and kitchen waste. They knew by direct experience that certain organic materials produced healthier, fuller, more fragrant roses. And among the most prized of those materials, in the kitchens of European country estates and Caribbean plantations alike was the dried peel of the banana. Josephine, born on a sugar plantation in Martinique, knew bananas intimately from her childhood. Her gardeners at Malmaison had access to bananas in her heated greenhouses, and they did what every Caribbean gardener had done for generations. They saved the peels, dried them, crushed them, and worked them into the compost piles that fed the rose beds. The practice spread through European horticultural circles for the rest of the 19th century, and by the Victorian era, English rose growers were trading recipes for banana peel preparations the same way modern home cooks trade pasta sauces. Before I go any further, I need to stop and tell you something important. This video is just the first layer of what the garden industry has spent decades burying. I spent months compiling every forgotten gardening technique, every suppressed home remedy, every cheap natural formula into one complete archive. All of it is inside the complete forbidden gardening vault. The exact banana peel preparation method for roses with seasonal application schedules, the Epsom salt formulas for tomatoes and lawns, the vinegar and salt weed killer recipe, the aspirin and milk tomato formula, the lawn tonic recipe your grandfather mixed in his garage, the diatomaceous earth method that ends garden pests without harming bees. Over 12 complete garden guides in one vault, every page built for immediate use this weekend in your own yard. The link is in the description, but stay here, because the science behind this kitchen scrap explains why an empress chose it over every chemical her empire could buy. Here's what actually happens at the cellular level when you feed a rosebush properly prepared banana peel. Roses, more than almost any other ornamental plant, are heavy feeders of potassium. Potassium is the nutrient most directly responsible for flower production, bloom size, petal quality, stem strength, and disease resistance. A potassium-deficient rose pushes out smaller, paler, fewer blooms, with weak stems that bend or break under their own weight. A potassium-rich rose explodes with deep-colored, large, long-lasting flowers on canes, thick enough to stand without staking. Banana peels, on a dry weight basis, contain roughly 40% potassium by mineral content. That makes them one of the densest natural sources of potassium available to a home gardener anywhere. They also contain meaningful amounts of phosphorus, calcium, magnesium, and trace sulfur, all the secondary nutrients that synthetic NPK fertilizers leave out. But here's the critical detail that the internet usually gets wrong. You cannot simply bury a fresh banana peel in the soil and expect anything good to happen. Fresh peels decompose slowly in cold soil, attract rodents and squirrels who dig them up, and can grow mold patches that introduce fungal problems near the root system. The Empress Josephine's gardeners knew better. They dried the peels first. The drying process kills surface mold spores, eliminates the sugar content that attracts pests, and breaks down the cellular structure so that microbes in the soil can extract nutrients quickly. Dried banana peel powder releases its potassium and trace minerals into the root zone within weeks, rather than months. If you have made it this far, you already understand more about rose nutrition than most homeowners spending hundreds of dollars on bottled bloom boosters every spring. Subscribe and share this with someone still throwing banana peels in the trash while writing checks to the garden center for branded rose food. Now stay with me, because the money trail behind this suppression is the real story. You cannot patent a banana peel. You cannot build a $40 billion ornamental flower industry on a kitchen scrap that every household generates for free 5 times a week. You cannot create 12 revenue streams selling rose food, potassium boost, bloom enhancer, organic fertilizer, and disease guard when one composted peel handles most of those needs at zero cost. The economic engine of consumer rose care depends on one psychological lever. The homeowner must believe that growing world-class roses requires expert formulations, scientific blends, and brand name expertise. A free kitchen scrap that grew the Empress's garden 2 centuries ago is a wrecking ball through the entire shelf. I need to be honest with you about the real limits of this technique. Banana peels are not a complete fertilizer. They contain very little nitrogen, the nutrient that drives green leafy growth. If your rose bushes are pale or stunted, banana peels alone will not solve that problem. They are also slow release, which means they support steady gradual feeding rather than fast dramatic results. Roses still need good compost, mulch, deep watering, and proper pruning to thrive. The banana peel is a powerful supplement for flower production, not a replacement for the basics. And do not skip the drying step. Bearing fresh peels around your roses is the version of this technique that actually fails, attracts pests, and gives the practice its undeserved reputation as an old wives' tale. Here's exactly how to do it in your own garden. Save banana peels in a paper bag on your kitchen counter for 1 week. At the end of the week, lay the peels flat on a baking sheet and dry them in your oven at 200 degrees Fahrenheit, with the door cracked open for 2 to 3 hours until they are black, brittle, and crumble between your fingers. You can also air dry them on a sunny windowsill for 5 to 7 days. Once fully dried, crush the peels by hand or pulse them in an old coffee grinder until they form a coarse black powder. Store the powder in a sealed jar. In early spring, just as your rose bushes begin to leaf out, sprinkle 2 to 3 tablespoons of dried peel powder around the base of each bush, working it lightly into the top inch of soil. Water in well. Repeat once a month through the growing season, ending in late summer. For an extra boost, mix the powder into your spring compost. The total cost across an entire season for a 6-bush rose garden, $0. Compare that to the $200 or more the industry wants you to spend on bottled bloom boosters that contain less potassium per dollar than the peel sitting in your trash. A homesteader in Vermont documented her rose garden online across 4 full summers using only dried banana peel powder, basic compost, and rainwater. Her before photos showed thin canes and small blooms. Her after photos from the 3rd summer showed 5-foot-tall bushes covered in blooms the size of teacups. Her total annual rose budget runs under $5, mostly for mulch. This knowledge didn't die because it stopped working. It died because it worked too well for too little money to fit inside a $40 billion industry that depends on you believing flowers need science from a bottle. Josephine Bonaparte fed her 250 rose varieties with kitchen scraps and compost 200 years ago. Pierre-Joseph Redoute painted those roses for the world to see. By 1830, half of Paris was growing them in backyard gardens. Then synthetic fertilizers arrived after the Second World War, and one generation of homeowners stopped saving their peels because a glossy commercial told them the chemists at Bayer had a better way. The chemists at Bayer did not have a better way. They had a more profitable way. The banana is in your fruit bowl. The peel is in your trash. The chemistry has not changed in 200 years. The only thing that changed is who convinced you to stop trusting the things that grew the world's most beautiful gardens. If this vault opened something for you today, subscribe and share this video. The next vault opens soon, and what is inside is going to make every irrigation company suddenly very nervous about their summer water bills.